On behalf of the Center for Africana Studies, welcome to the 2019 Honorable A. Leon Higginbotham Jr. Memorial Lecture. This annual lecture, which honors the legacy of Judge Higginbotham, is co-hosted by the Center for Africana Studies and Penn Law. We are so grateful to Dean Theodore Ruger for Penn Law's generous partnership in hosting this annual lecture. We are delighted, simply delighted, to welcome Brittany Barnett to Penn to deliver this year's Higginbotham Lecture. It is my great privilege to introduce Anita Allen, Henry R. Silverman Professor of Law, Professor of Philosophy, and Vice Provost for Faculty, who will present the welcoming remarks and introduce our speaker, Brittany Barnett. In addition to being the Henry R. Silverman Professor of Law and Professor of Philosophy here at Penn, Anita Allen is also the Vice Provost for Faculty and Chair of the Penn Provost Advisory Council. Anita Allen is an expert on privacy law, the philosophy of privacy, bioethics, and contemporary values, and is recognized for scholarship about legal philosophy, women's rights, and race relations. Her books include Privacy, Law, and Society, the most comprehensive textbook on the U.S. law of privacy and data protection, Unpopular Privacy, What Must We Hide?, The New Ethics, a guided tour of the 21st century moral landscape, Why Privacy Isn't Everything, Feminist Reflections on Personal Accountability, and Uneasy Access, Privacy for Women in a Free Society, the first monograph on privacy written by an American philosopher. Professor Allen has published more than 100 scholarly articles, book chapters, and essays, contributed to popular magazines, newspapers, and blogs, frequently appears on nationally broadcast television and radio programs, and is active as a member of editorial, advisory, and charity boards, and in professional organizations related to her expertise in law, philosophy, and healthcare. In 2010, she was appointed by President Obama to the Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues, the first African-American woman to hold both a PhD in philosophy and a law degree. She is a graduate of Harvard Law School and received her PhD in philosophy from the University of Michigan. Allen is an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the National Academy of Medicine. She has received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Electronic Privacy Information Center. She is the first African-American woman elected as president of the American Philosophical Association. Anita Allen serves on the Pennsylvania Board of Judges, the only non-judge charged to implement continuing judicial education statewide. Please join me in welcoming Vice Provost Anita Allen to the stage.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that introduction. This hall we're in right now, the Fitz Auditorium, is a very special place at Penn Law School. I have been a member of the law faculty here at Penn since 1998, and I remember when we didn't have such a nice space for lectures. But even back in the old days, before we had this lovely building, the law school sometimes joined forces with the African American Studies program to host the Honorable A. Leon Higginbotham Jr. Lecture. It was the then Afro-American Studies program that initiated the idea of this wonderful lecture. It was to honor a man who was not only a fabulous lawyer and judge, but also an important public servant and scholar. The lecture was actually renamed about 10 years after it was originally named, after the death of Professor Judge Higginbotham. Sorry, guys. It was renamed in his honor after he passed away to be called the Higginbotham Memorial Lecture. And the reason why I'm saying doctor, is because in the university as a whole, those of you who maybe not be part of the university community, most of us are doctor or professor, so I'm used to calling them doctor. But in the legal world, generally, lawyers are not doctors, and judges are not necessarily justices, so it gets a little complicated. But in any event, almost no one who's ever been a judge has had the impact on me that Judge Higginbotham had. Even though I never met Judge Higginbotham, I read his book, In the Matter of Color. I read it when I was in law school, and I had never had an opportunity, because I'm a boomer generation, to study about slavery and African-American history in school. And so when I read this important book that he wrote about slavery, it literally moved me to tears and taught me so much about the plight of my ancestors in the American South. This evening's lecturer is, I think she's a millennial, whereas most of our past lecturers have been very gray-haired people. Patricia Williams from Columbia Law School gave the lecture in the past. Charles Ogletree, these are names that are very prominent, as you can tell. Hawe Ibrahim, human rights lawyer, Mario Joseph, Brian Stevenson, who I'm sure you know very, very well, and is probably one of your role models in pursuing improvements in our criminal justice system, but Brian Stevenson gave the lecture. Mary Frances Berry gave the lecture. She's one of our professors who had a very distinguished career in Washington. Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, the historian from Harvard, Kahil Gibran Muhammad, director of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, Sherilyn Eiffel, who's currently the president and the director of counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, gave the lecture. I had the pleasure of meeting her just 2 weeks ago. Fantastic lecturer, and she graced this stage a while ago. So as you can tell, it's been really a who's who of the American legal establishment who's given these lectures, and we're honored tonight to have a perspective of someone who has lived an amazing life already and has some very important messages to tell us about criminal justice reform. First, I want to say just a little bit about who Judge Higginbotham was. I told you my personal attachment to him was through reading his scholarship, but he was a man of great broad talents and accomplishment. I wanted to say a little bit about that in his honor this evening. He was a law clerk to Justice Curtis Bok of the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas. He was, in 1953, appointed as Assistant District Attorney in Philadelphia. In 1954, he became a founding partner in one of the first African-American law firms in Philadelphia, a firm called Norris, Schmidt, Green, Harris, and Higginbotham. While he was in private practice, he served as a special deputy attorney general for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. He served as commissioner of the Pennsylvania Human Rights Commission, and he also served as president of the local Philadelphia chapter of the NAACP and a board member of various legal, political, and nonprofit organizations in Pennsylvania. In 1962, many presidents honored Judge Higginbotham. Among the first, President Kennedy appointed him to the Federal Trade Commission, making him the youngest person to serve on a federal regulatory commission. In 1963, the year Kennedy died, he named Higginbotham to the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, but the nomination got caught up in a lot of politics, and so he wasn't actually placed on the court until sometime later. In 1964, President Johnson gave Higginbotham a recess appointment, and he was confirmed that March, making him, at that point, one of the youngest judges ever appointed to a federal bench. Higginbotham played an important role in the civil rights movement. He was an advisor to President Johnson after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. He also served as vice chairman of a national commission on the causes and prevention of violence under President Johnson. In 1977, President Jimmy Carter, third president, appointed him to the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, where he remained for 16 years, serving as chief judge from 1989 until 1991, and as senior judge until his retirement in 1993. My husband had the pleasure of serving on the Third Circuit while Judge Higginbotham was still alive and active on the court. When he retired from the Court of Appeals, he by no means retired from public service. He became the public service professor of jurisprudence at Harvard's Kennedy School. He also served as an international mediator during South Africa's 1994 election and as counsel for the Congressional Black Caucus in a series of voting rights cases in the United States Supreme Court. He was appointed by President Clinton, is that the fourth or fifth president? President Clinton, as a commissioner of the United States Commission on Civil Rights. He was also counsel to the law firm of Paul Weiss Rifkin, a famous law firm, Wharton and Garrison. As a historian, he contributed to more than 100 publications and academic works and produced several critically acclaimed books, including the one I mentioned that so impacted me in the matter of color, the colonial period, 1978. Also, he wrote a book called Shades of Freedom, Racial Politics and Presumptions in the American Legal Process. During his lifetime, he received numerous national and international awards. I think he had something like 60 honorary degrees from universities all over the world. And the basis for these awards was his commitment to equality and civil rights. President Clinton awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian award, in 1995, just a few years before his death. So what about Judge Higginbotham? And I think I wanted him on the Supreme Court. That's why, okay, I'm just projecting here. During his 30-year relationship with Penn, he was a member of the Board of Overseers of this law school, and he was also chairman of the Board of Overseers for the law school and also the Graduate School of Education. He was an adjunct professor in the law school. He was a university trustee for many years, and in appreciation for his service, he was given various accolades by our Board of Trustees. And he was eventually given by our trustees the honorary degree here at Penn of Doctor of Laws. That was in 1975. So amazing career. Young lawyers can only aspire to achieve what Judge Higginbotham achieved. I really think that it's great to stand back and remember that somebody could do so much in such a relatively short lifetime, but he was a great judge. Now, a bit about our speaker tonight, Brittany Barnett, whom I'm delighted to meet for the first time. What an amazing story she has to share with us. Ms. Barnett credits her mother's own incarceration with teaching her that people in prison merit both compassion and concern. Barnett attended the University of Texas at Arlington, where she earned a BA and also a master's in accounting. She then went on to law school at SMU, Southern Methodist University's Dedham School of Law. The story goes that while she was in law school, taking a course on critical race theory, she came across the case of Ms. Sharonda Jones. And Ms. Jones had been sentenced to life in prison without parole for a single first-time nonviolent drug offense. Can you imagine? And this really hit Ms. Barnett hard, because she not only had the experience of her mother in mind, but she could also project that this is really, if this is what's happening to people in the American justice system, something is very, very, very wrong. As an attorney, as an entrepreneur, as a thought leader today who focuses on social impact investing, Ms. Barnett is co-founder of the Buried Alive Project, a national organization that works through transformative litigation, legislation, and humanization to dismantle life in prison without parole sentences handed down under the federal drug laws. Barnett's dedication to prison and sentencing reform has resulted in executive clemency from President Obama and President Trump. How'd you do that? For numerous clients. As well as she's achieved freedom for additional clients through the federal court system. Inspired by her own difficult experience of having a mother in prison, Brittany also founded Girls Embracing Mothers, GEM, a nonprofit organization empowering women in prison and their daughters to break the cycle of incarceration and lead successful lives with vision and purpose. She's been named one of America's most outstanding young lawyers by the American Bar Association, Outstanding Young Lawyer of Texas by the Texas Young Lawyers Association, and Outstanding Young Lawyer of Dallas by the Dallas Association of Young Lawyers. Please join me in welcoming Brittany Barnett.
Good evening. Thank you so much for that remarkable introduction. I am honored to stand here tonight and not be intimidated by the lecturers that have come before me, but to know that I'm standing on the shoulders of people that inspire me, like Judge Higginbotham and Brian Stevenson. That has given me great comfort tonight. A defining moment of my life can be attributed to a 7-digit number, 1374671. This number was assigned to my mother by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice when she began serving an 8-year prison sentence. But the significance of this number is much more than an inmate number assigned to my mother. This 7-digit number showed me a heightened sense of compassion and empathy that I never knew that I had. The 7-digit number was the gateway of me founding Girls Embracing Mothers to create a safe space for intergenerational healing of incarcerated women and their daughters. My experience of having a mother in prison was one of the most devastating things my sister and I had ever gone through, and I was a young adult. I cannot imagine being 9 or 10 and separated from my mother. I used to go visit my mom every month, my sister and I. I was 22, my sister was 21. And even more heartfelt than our own pain was observing mothers and their children in the visit room. And there was one visit where I remember a young girl, maybe 7 or 8, and she was sitting in her mom's lap, and she was telling her about an award she was going to get at school. And her mom started to cry. And the little girl said, "Mama, don't cry. You know, the award's not a bad thing." And she didn't realize in that moment that her mother was not crying because the award was a bad thing. Her mother was crying because she could not be there. And in that moment, I learned that even though I was a 22-year-old young adult, that I had something in common with this 7-year-old girl. And that is that we loved our mamas, no matter what. And that love is unconditional. And I realized that even more as the young girl hugged her mom and tried to help her wipe her tears. And so I wanted to create a space to have that intimacy between mothers and daughters, to break the cycle of incarceration, to help them lead successful lives with vision and purpose in a way that recognizes their humanity and does not marginalize a community of women and girls. Through this experience, I became very proximate to the issue of mass incarceration. I began to care more and pay more attention to a group of people that were often taught to stereotype and ignore. And those are people who are incarcerated. And now this group of people included my mother. In law school, I was determined to practice corporate law. I had a master's and bachelor's in accounting. I was a certified public accountant. I had worked for 2 years at PricewaterhouseCoopers as an auditor of technology companies, and I wanted to be a corporate lawyer. I wanted to blaze the trail for young Black girls to know that they too could be a corporate lawyer. I grew up in rural East Texas, Bogota, Texas, a town of about 1,200 people. There were 2 Black people in my class, me and my cousin, and I always wanted to be a lawyer, but the older I got, for some reason, I started feeling as if becoming a lawyer was something I could not obtain. In hindsight, I realized that that is because there was a lack of representation of lawyers. The closest lawyer that I knew in my head was Claire Huxtable on The Cosby Show. And so becoming a lawyer, I felt that I needed to blaze that same trail and be that representation for people. I also felt a yearning pull towards the criminal justice system. So in law school, I interned for a federal judge in the Southern District of Texas in Houston. And that summer, I sat in on numerous sentencing hearings. Most of them were for drug offenses. And I sat there and I saw a conveyor belt of Black and brown men being sentenced to decades for nonviolent drug offenses. And I recalled my own childhood growing up in rural Texas, where right, wrong, or indifferent, drugs were part of the culture. You either knew someone selling drugs or you knew someone who was using drugs. I knew both. One of my dear friends growing up, Keon Mitchell, at 23 years old, 3 months shy of obtaining a criminal justice degree, was arrested on his college campus at Texas A&M of Commerce and ultimately sentenced to life without parole for a federal drug offense. Being from East Texas, we thought this is an anomaly. This is just a draconian sentence that's handed down in rural East Texas. What is going on here? So I decided to take a critical race theory course in law school at SMU. It was a seminar course, so as you know, those classes are very small. It filled up very fast, and I literally begged the professor to allow me special permission to enter the course, and thankfully he did. I decided to use Keon's story as a mechanism for my paper, which was set to cover the disparity in sentencing between powder cocaine and crack cocaine, and the 100-to-1 sentencing ratio, which meant that you would get the same amount of time for 500 grams of powder cocaine as you would for 5 grams of crack cocaine. And so it made me wonder, okay, are we sentencing people, is our system sentencing people based on the type and quantity of drugs or the quantity of melanin in their skin? And I really wanted to use this critical race theory course to analyze the intersection between race and the law to truly understand how we got here. And in my paper, I had all the research. I saw that the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act was a reactionary policy heightened by the unfortunate overdose of Len Bias. I learned that there was little to no legislative history to promote or to even debate this 1986 drug abuse law. But I also learned that something was missing from this paper full of research, and that was the human element. I wanted to show the heartbeats behind all of this research and legislation that I had found, and I knew I was going to include my childhood friend, Keon Mitchell, but I also wanted to include a woman. And so, I kid you not, I went to Google, and I just typed in woman life, federal drugs, and a YouTube video popped up of a woman named Sharonda Jones. Sharonda Jones was serving a life without parole sentence as a first-time drug offender. I remember reading her story and thinking, okay, there has to be something more to the story, because I'm thinking Keon is just an anomaly, right? Like, she had to have killed somebody. There had to have been multiple murders involved. And the more I dug in her story, the more I realized that there was nothing more than that. Sharonda was from Terrell, Texas, a rural town in East Texas. In 1997, a drug bust led by Walker, the Texas Ranger, Chuck Norris, occurred in her small town of Terrell, Texas, of about 13,000 people, arresting about 70 people in one morning. Part of that 70 people included a couple who decided to cooperate against the government and in a drug conspiracy, and Sharonda was implicated by this co-conspirator, if you will, testimony. Sharonda was a middle woman, if you will, of where she knew a drug supplier in Houston and at the couple who needed drugs during what's called a drought. So she would make a few trips a year to connect them, get paid $1,000 a trip, maybe made about $10,000 in a year's time. And this wide net of federal drug law and conspiracy snared Sharonda Jones and the rest of her family. Sharonda was charged with 6 counts of possession and aiding and abetting of crack cocaine and 1 count of conspiracy. At her trial, the jury read not guilty verdict 6 times for the aiding and abetting counts and guilty once for drug conspiracy. So here I learned that conspiracy is the federal government's greatest tool. It only requires an agreement to act in furtherance of violation of federal drug laws, and that's it. And I found in my research that arguably the intent of Congress with these conspiracy laws was to get the major drug traffickers. But here we are kidnapping low-level drug offenders under these major drug trafficking laws and sentencing them to fundamental death sentences. Sharonda Jones had an 8-year-old daughter, and she decided to utilize her constitutional right to go to trial. At her trial, the most perplexing testimony came from the drug supplier in Houston, who testified that he had trafficked multiple hundreds of kilos of powder cocaine, and that yes, Sharonda Jones had come on a few occasions to purchase cocaine for this couple out of Terrell. And yet, in exchange for his cooperation, he received a sentence of 18 years. Sharonda, being very new to the system, continued with her trial and was ultimately, in November of 1999, sentenced to life without parole. There is no parole in the federal system. Life means life. When I read her story and thought more about Keon, I really felt the weight of the sentence in the core of my very being, understanding that life without parole is the second most severe penalty permitted by law in America. Understanding that Sharonda Jones was serving the same amount of time as the Unabomber. And as I dug more into her case, I wanted to get her free. And so I sent her a card in all of my naive 2L law student energy and told her that I was a law student and I was gonna help her get out of prison. I had no idea how. And she, as graciously as she could, wished me well in my studies, told me that many people had offered to help and no one had been successful. And so I went to pay Sharonda Jones a visit. And we developed a friendship and a relationship that lasted several years and continues to this day. I found that there was absolutely no legal remedy available for Sharonda through the court. There had been many changes in the law, including a United States Supreme Court case that made the mandatory nature of the federal sentencing guidelines advisory, including a United States Supreme Court case that now says the jury must decide elements of the offense that could increase your mandatory minimum, such as quantity. In Sharonda's case, there was a preponderance of the evidence standard. But none of these changes in the law were retroactive. So none of them reached back to benefit people like Sharonda Jones. And so I learned that the only avenue of relief for Sharonda was clemency from the President of the United States of America. And I learned that clemency is an exclusive sole power, unchecked, granted to the President of the United States through the Constitution. I, by this time, had accepted an offer and had began working at a law firm as a corporate lawyer, but working by night pro bono to help Sharonda Jones, and had taken on another case that included 5 men who were sentenced to life without parole and 30-year sentences and 40-year sentences, longer than any time they'd been on the earth. And I decided that I could take 2 cases to do clemency. Of course, Sharonda, and I decided to also represent Donald Clark, who was in his 22nd year of a first-time nonviolent drug offense prison sentence. And I worked and I put this petition together, and I wanted to show their tremendous rehabilitative efforts. And one of my mentors said, you have to humanize them. You want to show their rehabilitative efforts. You want to show that they'll be successful upon reentry. You want to show they have community support. You want to show they accept responsibility and have accountability for their actions. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to use all this to humanize the story. And I did. But as I was writing it, I remember thinking, just the fact that Sharonda Jones is still standing after 16 years of a life without parole sentence isn't exceptional enough. And so I continued to play the game, follow the blueprint, because clemency was our only hope. And on March 31st, 2015, I received a call from the Office of the Pardon Attorney telling me that President Barack Obama had granted clemency to my client, Donald Clark, who was in his 22nd year, and I was elated. I was so happy. I couldn't wait to tell him. And I remember asking the attorney from the U.S. Pardon Attorney's Office on the phone, what about Sharonda Jones? Because I had filed their clemency petitions the same day, and she said, well, I only have information on Mr. Clark. If she received clemency, you'll get a call today. And so I called Donald, I gave him the news, and I hung up and did not leave my desk waiting on this call for Sharonda that I just knew was coming. By 6 o'clock Central Time, which is 7 out here, I knew that I was not gonna get that call. And I remember going home and curling up into bed just under a blanket of failure. I was so happy for Donald, but at least he had a release date, even before the clemency. And I didn't know how to reach out to Sharonda to tell her that another client had gotten clemency and she hadn't, but I didn't have to. In the federal system, there's a system called Core Links, and you can email with people in federal prison over an intranet system that costs them to email us. And I received an email from Sharonda, and she said, I've seen the list. I am so happy for Donald. I know I'm next. We share the same lawyer. No pressure, right? So that just lifted me out my slump to know that if she can be this positive in the face of a reality that would be unbearable for many, I need to get up. I need to continue to fight for her. I need to continue to get her name out there and continue to raise awareness. And ultimately on December the 18th, 2015, I got the call after 6 years of working on her case that Sharonda Jones had received clemency from President Barack Obama and her life sentence was being removed. And I'm always thrilled to have her stand up to say hi to everyone because she's here with me tonight. So after serving and surviving 16 years and 9 months of a life without parole sentence, Sharonda Jones is one of my best friends in the world. Sorry, I always tear up. And learning that as I was working to free Sharonda, she was helping me to free myself. And so I said, once Sharonda's free, I'm not taking any more cases. This is it. It's been 6 years. I'm tired. And more people started reaching out, and I just could not stop. So by now, I'm in-house counsel. I'm associate general counsel at a financial services firm, working in mergers and acquisitions and still working on cases. And a case comes to me of a man named Cory Jacobs. Cory was 23 years old and indicted for crack cocaine offenses out of the Eastern District of Virginia and ultimately sentenced to 16 life sentences as a first-time nonviolent drug offender. And I remember getting his case, and he had an advocate who was on my bumper for me to take his case, and I was just tired, and I didn't know if I had it in me. And then I had a call with him, and anyone who ever meets Cory Jacobs can just feel his energy fill up a room, and there was just no way I could tell him no. And so I remember talking to Sharonda. I'm sitting on her couch at the time. She loves to cook, so she was always, I say she was using me as her guinea pig to test out all these foods after she was released. And she said, are you sure that you're going to take the case? I know you're tired. Your work is really busy and demanding. And I said, yeah, I'm sure he doesn't deserve to be in there. And she said, well, I guess he's getting out then. And I went to visit Cory Jacobs after I filed his petition at a United States penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. And United States penitentiaries in the federal system is a high security prison. And the reason that Cory Jacobs was there was because he had a life sentence. It wasn't because of the severity of the crime, it was because of the nature of the sentence. And so the federal prison has a death row at Terre Haute. It's one of the most vicious federal penitentiaries in the country. And I go visit him, and it's much different than when I used to visit my mom or when I used to visit Sharonda, which is still a prison, but this was like concrete and steel everywhere. And I remember sitting in the visit room, waiting on him to come, a little nervous on what it would be like to meet, you know, a man with 16 life sentences who had been in at this time about 17 years. And he walks in just full of life, and we had the best conversation. We prayed over his clemency petition, and we got it filed. And he started telling me about the benefits of meditation, because I'm still in the throngs of mergers and acquisitions. I'm still working a lot. I'm tired. Every day is intense. And so he said, I should start to meditate. And he gave me tips, and we went through a short meditation session in the room, totally taking us out of this gray, bleak environment that we're in. And I remember him giving me all this guidance and advice about meditating, telling me he had read a book that said that he heard that nature could enhance the meditation experience, but he hadn't seen a tree in years because the United States penitentiary walls block out any ray of hope through green leaves and trees. And I remember Cory kept talking, and I just could not remember anything he said for the rest of our visit because I could not get over the fact that he had not seen a tree. A tree. I remember leaving the prison visit thinking, I don't have 6 years with Cory that I had with Sharonda. President Obama is leaving office in 9 months. This is going to be a lot of work. What do I do? And as I drove back from Terre Haute, Indiana to Indianapolis to the airport, taking in every single tree that I could, I made a decision. And I went back to Dallas, and I resigned from corporate law to truly follow my passion to transform this nation's criminal justice system and to ensure Cory Jacobs and many other people did not die in prison. Cory Jacobs was ultimately granted clemency by President Obama on December 19th, almost a year to the day after Sharonda Jones. Thank you. But I remember President Obama leaving office, and the Clemency Initiative that he started had left as well, that I had really dived into when I left corporate law. I got heavily involved with the initiative. And I remember thinking, uh-oh, I've left my job. Like, what am I gonna do now? And it took some really deep soul searching and reflection. And I had Cory was out, Sharonda was out. I had ended up getting 7 clients clemency under President Obama. And they empowered me so much and were living their best lives upon release, but they still had this heavy weight of survivor's remorse because they had been in prison 16 years, 18 years, developed families in prison with people that they knew better than their own families at this time. And so we decided to come together and co-found the Buried Alive Project, which focuses on dismantling life without parole sentences through transformative litigation, legislation, and most importantly, humanization. We want to amplify the voices of those directly impacted and feel they should be at the center of any movement, of any work surrounding them. And so Sharonda and Cory are co-founders, they're leaders, they help me with strategy, and we went to work. I launched the project at SMU Dedman School of Law's new Deason Criminal Justice Reform Center with about 75 law students, and we set to work to identify every single person that we could in the federal system who was serving life without parole. And we did this with law students because that is where I got my start, if you will. And I needed them. And they were hungry for this type of work. SMU is more of a business school. You're going there, that's your goal. And so this public interest criminal justice reform work was really different. And we worked really hard to identify nearly all of the 1,600 people in the federal system set to die in prison. And we did this through innovative thinking with law students, because the United States Sentencing Commission, no one would give us the names of the people who were serving this time. And we wanted to amplify their voices. We wanted to know not just the numbers, but who are they? Where are they from? Do they have children? What are their hopes and dreams? And unfortunately, President Obama denied 18,000 people clemency. Fortunately, he granted 1,752, more than any other president in modern day history. But we took that denial list and had a friend write an algorithm and searched the Bureau of Prisons website and identified every person that we could out of that 18,000 with life. And then law students went to our handy Westlaw and Lexus, and we pulled out all the drug lifers and sent over 800 questionnaires to people in federal prison that we had identified serving life for drugs. And that is what started the Buried Alive Project, and that could not have happened without the help of law students taking time out of their already busy schedules to get intimate and proximate to this issue. I've worked with law students for over 2 years now, and throughout this process, we've made sure to truly humanize the issue and bring, like I said, directly impacted people on board. Also utilizing our co-founders, Cory Jacobs and Sharonda Jones, to really help guide our messaging. One of Sharonda Jones' best friends in prison for nearly 15 years was a woman named Alice Johnson. And Sharonda is a very strong woman. I think in the 6 years I've represented her, I only seen her cry one time, and it was a single tear. I saw her cry when Alice Johnson was denied clemency by President Barack Obama. And I could feel the pain from that denial, because Sharonda was free and she knew her friend deserved to be free as well. And so we began advocating for Alice Johnson. Alice Johnson began advocating for herself. She helped us write her story to put on the Buried Alive Project website. She did news interviews with people. She did an interview via Skype from prison with Mike.com that went viral and caught the attention of Kim Kardashian West. Kim Kardashian saw the video randomly on Twitter. She just happened to be on there and saw it. And she was not only moved to tears, she was moved to action. And a legal team was assembled that I am honored to have been a part of, that helped aid the clemency for Alice Johnson from President Trump in June of 2018. A lot of people read the headlines and just assumed that Kim goes to the White House one day and then Alice has clemency the next, but there was about 7 months of behind-the-scenes negotiation. There was about 7 months of education for Kim that she was very open to receiving. She made sure that she was equipped with every tool the legal team could give her before she went in. And it was successful. And after serving over 21 years in federal prison, Alice Johnson is free. And she is very much a part, thank you. She is very much a part of the Buried Alive Project. She served as a fellow. She helps to advocate for people that they left behind, if you will, literally buried alive. And so we still represent people, and there's so much genius behind bars. Some of the most brilliant people that I've ever met in my life have been my clients. And if you think about it and you take away the illegal product, they're entrepreneurs that just didn't have opportunities and resources. And so one of the current clients we're advocating for now is a young man named Chris Young, who was arrested at 22 and ultimately sentenced to life without parole for a nonviolent drug offense. Chris Young is serving life under Clinton's old 3 strikes law. He had a first prior when he was 18 for 7 grams of crack. His second prior when he was 19 for less than 0.5 grams of crack, literal crumbs. The quantity from both convictions weighed less than 3 pennies. But the prosecutor, in his sole authority, decided to enhance Chris's sentence under the 3 strikes law. Because Chris turned down a 14-year plea deal and utilized his constitutional right to go to trial. Once the prosecutor enhances your sentence under the 3 strikes law, there is absolutely nothing the judge can do but go through the theatrics and the motions of sentencing you to life. During his sentencing, Chris stood up and gave one of the most compelling speeches that I've ever read in my life, and I can't imagine having actually been in the courtroom. He had sat in the county jail for 4 years before sentencing and had memorized in his head this 45-minute speech that talked about Van Gogh and talked about economists and finance and what he would do if he were ever to be released. And most heartbreakingly, it talked about growing up with a mother severely addicted to crack cocaine. It talked about walking in with the lights cut off in his small home in Clarksville, Tennessee. It talked about him and his brother being teased for not being able to bathe for days because the water was off. It talked about his older brother, who was 4 years older than him, sucking up his pride to ask a neighbor if they could take a bath. It talked about Chris Young at 18 walking in and finding his brother dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound at only 22 years old. And so here is Chris Young, 18 years old, with the only person that has ever truly been there for him gone. And it truly started a downward spiral. But here he is standing at a podium in a situation where he knows he is going to prison for the rest of his life. And he gives this speech that shows the ingenuity that our nation needs to thrive, that we're about to lock up forever. And Judge Kevin Sharp sat on the bench and he interrupted Chris once, only to ask him to slow down. And Judge Sharp tells me that he wanted Chris to slow down, 1, because he really wanted to hear what he had to say, and 2, because he dreaded having to say those words, that he was having to sentence Chris Young to spend the rest of his life in prison. Judge Sharp ultimately left the bench, citing Chris Young's case as one of the primary reasons. We're talking a lifetime appointment. He now works with me on Chris Young's case, and I am hopeful that we'll be able to get him free soon, some kind of way, and really work to unchain this potential that is languishing behind bars. And so the work that we do, it not only unlocks people, but it unlocks potential. And what I really want to show is that the potential. Everybody makes mistakes. We all make mistakes. Sometimes the only difference between us and Sharonda is she got caught. And so being able to humanize it in a way that we feel it, that it's heartfelt, but understanding that these are people and they're not bad people, they just made bad choices, really helps to drive the needle. The human element is rarely addressed, but it's necessary to drive impactful change. Nobody should be sentenced to die in prison for selling drugs. That is just absolutely out of the question, unconscionable for me, that to say that Sharonda Jones should never breathe air as a free person ever again. And it's not in any way to condone illegal activity, to condone breaking the law, but the consequences have to be fair, they have to be proportionate, and they have to be just. And so I'm really happy to be here tonight to really help motivate people. I know the criminal justice system and everything that's wrong with it can be overwhelming. It's daunting even for me, which is why I'm focusing on such a specific group of people, but we can all do our part. Even if it's just you leaving here and sharing what you've learned tonight with someone else. What I find over and over again is people have no clue that people are set to die in prison for selling drugs. And so what we're working to do as well through social impact investing, that's really important for me using my business background, is working to be able to take people from survival mode to thriving. Because it's a whole different shift in mindset when you're not trying to survive every day. And also showing that there truly is nothing more urgent than freedom. And that we should all do our part and continue to do our part. The fact that Chris Young is serving life today under yesterday's drug laws blows my mind. In December 2018, Trump signed the First Step Act into law. It is indeed a great initial first step. It is indeed a very limited piece of legislation. And we should not sit back and continue to clap and celebrate a very limited piece of legislation. We have more work to do. We have to move on. But this piece of legislation eliminated the 3 strikes law life sentences. It rolled it back to 25 years if your 2 priors were serious, meaning you had to have gone to prison for at least a year. Neither one of Chris's priors would have qualified, but that provision of the law was not made retroactive. So we still have a lot more work to do. I want to show you all a video clip about the Buried Alive Project because it empowers me to have my clients and my friends, my family now working side by side with me in this work. And then we're going to open it up for questions.
My name is Cory Jacobs, and I was sentenced to 16 life sentences for a drug offense, without no possibility of parole. Essentially, I was buried alive. Serving life without the possibility of parole, not only do you not have light at the end of the tunnel, but you don't even have a tunnel to look down for hope. I could never tell my kids, like, a definite day where they was gonna see me again. But I never stopped believing. I never stopped being faithful and knowing that if I just worked hard, I can move mountains. I got the my freedom plaque, you know, from President Obama, you know.
My name is Sharonda Jones. I was sentenced to a natural life sentence for a first-time drug offense. I was buried alive. I want people to know that Sharonda Jones made a bad decision. However, I did not let that define who I was as a person. We built a bond of communication, and she was like, no matter what, I'm gonna get you out of prison. And so, like, at that time, I was in a really, I still get emotional because I can't believe, like, I'm here. I mean, this is real. Faith is what kept me going. When Brittany became my hope, without a shadow of a doubt, I knew I was getting out. I learned from the mistake that I made, and I built on that. I built the character that I have today to always reach back and to always give that lending hand and always be that listening ear.
This is not about who or what, it's about us.
Exactly.
It's about us.
That's right.
It's about people who are buried alive. They have to continue to have hope because really people were shocked
Yes,
that I was granted clemency under President Trump.
You see there Ms. Johnson being reunited with her friends and her family.
I wanted to co-found this Buried Alive project because, you know, when I left prison, I left a lot of people behind.
Picture the darkest place that you can, and this is where I live.
I cried in front of my kids.
And everybody was confused. No one could understand how I could have received a life sentence without the possibility of parole.
And, you know, to have to walk outside those doors and, like, actually look at these guys and knowing that they possibly would never get out, that hurt me, even with me getting my freedom, you know? And I just realized that freedom is a gift, a gift that I shouldn't take for granted. It's my obligation to come out here and reach back in for those who don't have the same blessing that I have.
The gift and the grace and mercy that was given to me have to be shared with others. We can't stop this.
People often ask, how can they help? Well, I say, invest in the Buried Alive Project. You're investing in the community. You're investing in people who are sincerely here to see a change.
That is my team. That is my team. So I don't know if you want me to open it up for questions. Anyone have any questions or comments for me or for Sharonda? Feel free to ask. He's free. So Keon, I was able to chip away at his life sentence through the court over a course of several years. He was released in February 2018 at the age of 37 after serving 14 years. And he just texted me last week. He had started a job at a car dealership and been promoted already to sales manager of the entire department. And so when I tell you that we're locking away some genius, I'm not kidding. Yeah. Yes? Yes, there's many ways to invest. The most important investment to me is time and attention to these issues. We have worked with law students from SMU to the University of Houston to Notre Dame because we work remotely and we still have, several hundreds of cases to analyze in further depth. We've done our first run through, but we still have questionnaires to go through. For example, I want to know the number of lifers that we can identify who were offered plea deals initially and what those plea deals were. In Chris Young's case, for example, how do you go from 14 years to death? It makes any sense. Or Farrell Scott is serving life for marijuana. And he was offered 12 years and he decided to go to trial and got life from 12. And Farrell says, I sold marijuana and I got life. People are selling marijuana today and getting life savings. And so we have to really keep this in mind and what that means. And so there's many ways to invest, even if it comes to helping us analyze more cases from a legal perspective or just from a purely administrative perspective and helping us update our spreadsheets, investing financially, of course, or putting us in touch with potential financial sources. We are working to build a super team of lawyers because no matter how much the law changes, the implementation side is very, very important, and I think that gets overlooked. We're celebrating the First Step Act, which was a big deal, but what people don't see is that we are fighting the United States government and prosecutors every day on these cases. My co-counsel and I did a 90 Days of Freedom campaign in the spring, and we freed 17 men serving life without parole in 90 days. 2 women lawyers. And the government opposed every single case that we had. Yes, and Syracuse has a database as well. The problem is, and we analyzed over 30 years of data from the United States Sentencing Commission with SMU's economics department and with an economist from Rand Corporation. What we found is the deeper we dug in the data, the less complete it was. It's very inconsistent. And so we're hoping to be able to piece that together ourselves through the questionnaires that we've sent in, because it's problematic. And one reason it's problematic, especially with the 3 strikes and prosecutorial discretion, is you have Chris Young in a district where 75 to 99% of the cases are eligible for 3 strikes enhancements. Prosecutors in his district pursue 3 strikes enhancements in 75 to 99% of the cases. But then you have a district 60 miles away in the Northern District of Pensacola, and the same thing, 75 to 99% of the defendants qualify or eligible. Prosecutors pursue the enhancement in less than 25%. So your life sentence is determined by your zip code. So it's a lot of work to be done there, and there needs to be a lot of data analysis, deep data analysis surrounding that. Yes. I remember the very first visit with my mom. And to preface this whole thing, my mom was a nurse. She's still a nurse today. And she had a severe crack cocaine addiction. She was what you would call a functioning drug addict, because no one would have ever thought that my mom was addicted to drugs. And when my sister and I graduated from high school, her addiction spiraled out of control. But instead of treatment, she got prison. She had a run-in with a police officer and was sentenced to probation, but she could not pass a drug test. Over and over and over, she failed her drug test and ultimately was sentenced to prison. And so this is a situation that we're in when I'm visiting, and as soon as she goes to prison, I'm like, I gotta go see her. I've had cousins go to prison, uncles, mom, but not my mama. It's a primal wound. And I go in and I'm ready to see her, and I go through security and I'm so nervous. And here I am, thinking I'm hot stuff. I got a master's at 21. A bachelor's at 21, a master's at 22. I'm working at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I'm kind of feeling like I'm untouchable, but this situation brought me to my knees. And it was kind of like, why me? And I kind of like, well, why not you? Who do you think you are? And so I go in this prison and I'm so nervous, and the lady's like, if you got a underwire on your bra, then you're not gonna get to visit. And I'm like, I just drove 2.5 hours. Like, what am I gonna, what do I do? Not knowing there's a dollar store up the street, which are probably intentionally placed there because this happens all the time. Luckily, I made it through. So that was the first step of dehumanization, was the metal detector. And then I go in at this first visit, and I'm looking around for my mom, and I see these other women sitting at the table in their white uniforms, and I don't see my mama. And so I go to the guard, and I'm here for Evelyn Fulbright, and he says, inmate number. Like she didn't even have a name. Like, how many Evelyn Fulbrights could there be, But so that was a form of dehumanization. And I realized that because my mom had just gotten there, she hadn't been there 60 days, we could not have an in-person visit. So I had to visit my mom through a glass. And that glass is deceiving. You seem so close, but you are worlds away. And I remember, we reached up and we touched our hands, and I'm straining to hear her on the phone. One, because it's loud in the back, but also the phones are cheap, and I'm trying to take in any word. I just want to hear her voice. And I remember seeing little lip prints, and it tears me up every time, but it was baby lip prints where a baby had been kissing the glass, trying to get to their mom. And it was so dehumanizing to be in that situation. One of the most vivid memories I'll have when we had a contact visit was hearing my mom have to ask to use the restroom and being told no, that she would have to wait until the end because it was 30 minutes left in the visit. But what if she had been holding it the whole 2 hours? That's painful. And so it was a very dehumanizing experience for my sister and I can't imagine how it truly was for my mom. Wow. Wow. It is a true system of misguided appeals for law and order that devastates entire families and communities. I can't speak for you, but that 2.5 months probably felt like 20 years. My mom served 2.5 years, and it was the longest 2.5 years of my life. I can't imagine 16 years and 9 months, of Sharonda's sentence. And I truly look at it for people in prison and for families as an act of survivorship. It takes a lot to face this sentence. In federal cases, even to see the case site, United States of America versus Sharonda Jones. You know, it even starts there for the psyche, and the dehumanization part of it is the most tragic, which is why I get so much strength from my clients, because it takes a special type of grace and dignity to carry a life sentence, to carry any type of sentence and still remain as positive as they are. Yes?
Because otherwise we're short-handed.
I completely agree with you, and I feel the humanization aspect should be front and center, even with the law students. So before I started the Buried Alive Project, when I left corporate law, I dove into the Obama's Clemency Initiative, and I did a pop-up clinic at SMU where I had 20 law students and taught them how to do clemency petitions, and we prepared 20 at the last minute under the administration because they did not have lawyers to help them. And one of the only requirement that I had of the law students was they had to be in direct contact with their client. And most of the reviews I got after the pop-up clinic was about how much that changed their lives. Even the law students who were going to be prosecutors, who come from Highland Park, where SMU is located, who've never seen the outside of a prison, let alone the inside of one, their hearts and minds were changed. We have to develop empathy. Otherwise, no one cares. No one cares Sharonda Jones had life, because no one even stops to realize what that means. We throw around sentences like 5 years and 15 years like it's $5. That's 5 years is a long time. And I think with the opioid epidemic, it is a public health crisis, and so was crack cocaine. And we demonized it. And we locked up people, you know, and I think that I am happy that opioids is being treated as a public health crisis and people are humanizing that issue, but we have to look back at the systemic issues of it, as you're saying, and we gotta retroactively apply the 3 strikes law. Why are people serving life for marijuana when people are getting life sentences that look nothing like them? And so I think as lawyers, the humanization aspect is deeply important, not just for us, but for our fellow lawyers and our friends around us, because the humanization from even a layperson helps with who you're voting for at the polls.
Please join me again. You know, I wish we could continue, but we are out of time. But let us thank Brittany Barnett. And let me say, even before I let you applaud, I'm going to give you, I want you to, because I want to join you in giving that huge applause. But even before we do that, I just want to say I'm holding on to your words, all the words, and especially when you said there is nothing more urgent than freedom. Clearly, right? Brittany Barnett has taught us that. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Thank you so much.
Brittany Barnett, let me also say, she has sat, I feel like is the director of the Center for Africana Studies. Some of you may know as the new director. I want to say, Brittany Barnett, that you have set everything we will be doing this year in motion. And what do I mean by that? What could be better preparation for Angela Davis's visit in January than this? Thank you, Brittany Barnett. Wednesday, January 15th, everyone, at 5:30. Put it on your calendar. Don't you want to be here? Angela Davis and Gina Dent, right? Mark that. Go to our website and you will see we have many other events, but I must underscore that there is nothing better. This flow, thank you. I must say it again and again, thank you so much. I also want to say, before we get Angela Davis, let me also say that the redesigned African Gallery at Penn Museum, everyone check out everything going on November 15th to the 17th at the Penn Museum. And let us now thank Brittany Barnett again. Thank you all.